Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Can you take a seat, please? After this video introduction, let me do the welcome note for this ceremony. Dear Vice Minister of Education, University and Research, dear Head of the Department for Higher Education and Research of the Ministry of Education, University and Research, dear Director General of the Direttore Generale for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, dear distinguished guests, dear participants to this ceremony, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you in opening this event dedicated to the launch of EPOS ERIC, the European Plate Observatory System European Research Infrastructure Consortium. EPOS and the establishment of EPOS ERIC is a success story, and it is considered by the Italian Ministry of Education, University and Research a best practice. This is happening thanks to people. Thanks to people as the representatives of the institutions that with their commitment made this step possible. And today I'll shortly have the pleasure to give the floor to Professor Lorenzo Fioramonti, Italian Vice Minister of Education, University and Research, Dr. Jean-Éric Paquet, Director General of the Direttore General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission, Professor Carlo Doglioni, President of INGV, the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, and Dr. Valdemar Dotter from the Iceland Met Office of the Icelandic Ministry for the Environment and Natural Resources. Thanks to people as the delegates of the members of the ERIC present here today, with whom I will have tomorrow the first General Assembly of this ERIC, with the aim to be operational since the very first moment. Thanks to people as the representatives of Member States and associated countries of the European Union that compose the boards of governmental representatives that finished yesterday with its last assembly its mandate, since the ERIC is now established. A welcome and a big thank to them. We did a great job together during the last 4.5 years I was representing Italy in this board, and it was a pleasure and an honor to guide this board as a chair for almost 2 years until yesterday. Thanks also to people as excellent researchers, for example, the ones who worked and are working in the frame of the EPOS implementation project, financed by the European Commission with substantial resources, and I'll give the floor later to Dr. Massimo Cocco, the EPOS coordinator. Now, let me take this opportunity to highlight some concrete actions Italy puts in place for supporting research infrastructures and in particular ERICs. Italy is actively involved in international negotiations for the setting up of ERICs, ensuring its participation to boards of governmental representatives like the one above mentioned for EPOS. During these negotiations, some specific items to be negotiated with particular attention among the potential ERIC members were highlighted, like, for example, the one related with the definition of the fiscal exemptions in the ERIC status, on which member states had different positions sometimes. On this, Italy is strongly engaged in trying to find a convergent solution with a twofold effort. On one side, through an internal interministerial task force with the involvement of the Ministry of Finance, and on the other side, through continuous contacts and negotiations with the European partners, always with the scope of maximizing the benefits for the scientific community. Then, to strengthen the ministerial support to research infrastructures which have applied for or have been granted an ERIC status, the Ministry of Education, University and Research legally established an interministerial coordinating committee for ERICs. This committee is considered a key element. The committee is helpful in implementing the national strategy defined in the National Programme for Research, but it also defines a useful space for discussion among representatives of research institutions and funding agencies. The committee will then certainly be an important instrument for improving the coordination between Italian research institutions and reducing the fragmentation of the Italian research system. Finally, among actions Italy puts in place for supporting research infrastructures, it is also worth to mention the 2018 increase of the financial resources available for international activities in the budget line dedicated to research institutes. To finish, let me again highlight that the Italian Ministry of Education, University and Research is very proud to host you here today for its ceremony. I thank you very much for your participation, and I leave the floor to the Vice Minister, Professor Lorenzo Fioramonti. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is always a pleasure to be able to talk about the good things that Italian researchers and European researchers are doing together. So I'd like to thank, Dr. La Rosa has already done all the formal things, so I can skip that part. So I'd like to thank, of course, my colleagues from the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology, Dr. Valdemar's doctor from Iceland, and of course, my friend and colleague, the Director General of the European Commission, Dr. Jean-Luc Paquet. What I am really interested in highlighting here is that I think the EPOS is a unique opportunity for our country to make a significant difference in what I believe is a crucial field of research. Italy is a country full of volcanoes, full of geophysical phenomena that are mostly unparalleled around the world. I mean, probably second to Iceland and maybe Costa Rica and other parts of the world. We're pretty up there when it comes to experiencing the problems of what happens when our beautiful Earth moves and what happens under the surface. And I think there is a two faces of this coin. On the one hand, of course, understanding better how our planet operates is important to ensure safety, to ensure well-being of those human beings and the ecosystems living above the surface. But also, I believe, understanding better the conditions of the operations of the Earth can give us opportunities in many positive areas, including energy production and a more sustainable development. And I had the honor to visit Iceland a couple of times. And I presume, like Dr. Valdemar's doctor will talk about it, but a country that has been able to turn the physical movements of its earth into a fundamental resource for clean energy, which I think is extremely, extremely important. So, and there's another thing that I want to highlight here, is the overall approach of creating partnerships and research infrastructures that spread across different countries. This is also a fundamental paradigm of science in the 21st century, and I want to congratulate, of course, the European institutions on spearheading this idea of research across borders. And the overall system of research consortia, infrastructure systems that involve several countries around the world, and in this case, a number of European countries, but also non-European countries or non-European Union member states, I think is fundamental. And I'm very happy that Italy took the lead. Again, I want to congratulate my colleagues from the National Institute of Volcanology and Geophysics, because I think way too often we somehow in this country do not really understand how important research is. How important research is not only for the scientific community, but for the overall well-being of our societies, for the safety of our citizens, for improving the conditions of work, for improving the competitiveness of our economy, for improving the overall state of our education system, and so on and so forth. There are so many different ramifications that we often ignore in public debate. Research is way too important to become political. I think it is fundamentally important that, especially in times of economic distress, we maximize and optimize the resources that we have. And I think we should be celebrating all the good things that Italian researchers are doing in this country. And we'll be dedicating, actually, in my agenda today, the entire day to celebrate research and in the company of my colleague, Dr. Paquet, as well in the afternoon. So I think this is another example of how well our researchers are doing, how important partnerships are, and how important they are in a specific field that speaks to the core issues of safety and development in our country as well. I think we can do well in this field. I think there are good examples around the world we can learn from and become pioneers in many different ways, interdisciplinary ways of understanding the interaction between our geophysical movements and the incredible, in my view, I'm not a physicist, but I like to read about issues of physics and issues of chemistry and so on and so forth, because I believe science is one thing, and the opportunities that we can harness to turn that into a fundamental resource for our country and for Europe at large. So I'm very happy also to see, and here I have to say something more formal, that this has been a process in the making. That's the other thing about research that often people ignore, that it takes a long time to get things off the ground. So this initiative already started in the previous FEMA program, was then brought to completion in its initial phase during the Horizon 2020, and we'll start seeing the light now as an operational consortium. It takes time for research to bear fruit. It takes time for it to bring results. It takes time for it to be able to have an impact on our life. And this is what politicians have to understand, that we need to be in for the long haul. We have to understand that long-term change matters at times more than short-term gains. And so I'm also here to congratulate the other institutions that participated in setting up the experimental facilities and the research infrastructures. And here, of course, I've already mentioned the National Institute for Geophysics and Volcanology, but I'd like to also thank the National Center for Research, ISPRA, the University of Trieste, Genoa, Roma III, Naples, Federico II, and as well as Cineca and EU Center that contributed in different ways and in different roles to this success story. Once again, I welcome this inauguration day very much, and EPOS, the whole ERIC infrastructure for research initiative is very close to my heart, and I think this government is extremely serious about making Italians proud again of their achievements and turning their initial achievements into many more glorious achievements in the future, when not only We'll be talking about research and highlighting the successes, but also putting more money into those examples and those research initiatives that are already successful. Thank you.
So I thank you very much, Professor Lorenzo Fioramonti, for sharing with us some thought. And I give the floor to Dr. Jean-Éric Paquet, the Director General of DG Research and Innovation of the European Commission. Please.
Salvatore, thank you very much. Minister, dear colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be in Rome this morning and to participate in this launch ceremony of the European Plate Observing System. I'm a bit uneasy with acronyms, but I will use a few today. With the European Plate Observing System as a European Research Infrastructure Consortium. I mean, this is the platform for solid earth science in Europe, and I must say I'm really impressed and proud that you have been able to bring scientific communities together, and that we can today, including after the formal decision was taken by the Commission to acknowledge and recognize this ERIC, to launch EPOS this morning. I must say EPOS already probably has the nicest video clip of all ERICs. I think this was also particularly well done and gives a very good sense, I think, of the dynamics and the scientific dynamics behind the idea and the creation of this European Research Infrastructure Consortium. I'm also particularly happy to be here this morning because this is the 20th European Research Infrastructure Consortium, 20 already, for an instrument now launched 10 years ago. I mean, Salvatore knows that better than any of us. He is involved in 15 of these 20 ERICs because Italy is a very active member state in these research infrastructure consortium. But I think it is indeed a very strong indication of the success of the instrument, but not just the instrument, but the capacity of European scientists and their institutions and member states supporting them to come together and bring together the national capacity in these European research infrastructure consortia. So it's an important day for the Commission and for Italy, but it's an important day for 138 institutions I saw, 12 plus 9 member states, 6 international organizations, of which the Commission, I suppose, but 5 more. And many of you made us the honor to also attend the ceremony today. Creating a European research infrastructure, including in the context of an ERIC, is, as Lorenzo said, a long journey. It started, I understand, already in 2008. And I think the relentless effort of the coordinator, Massimo Coccio, you will speak afterwards, and I understand you were there since 2008. So resilience and persistence, I think, is also the hallmark of EPOS, of ERICs generally, but EPOS as well, has allowed, I think, very different scientific communities in very different scientific areas to progressively decide to come together. These scientific communities were already working often at European level, so you decided to move beyond the way you were already cooperating internationally and in a European context, and indeed make the jump into this much more integrated and we expect much more impactful consortium, which is the EPOS ERIC. And I think, Massimo, a lot of that is due to you and your team's efforts, but also I think to the trust which so many of us are putting into EPOS ERIC. I mean, this obviously is, how do you call it, Lorenzo? The end of the beginning, I think is the way you put it, because now it really starts. It's a day of celebration, but a day which really now marks the beginning, we hope, of the scientific work, and also where EPOS will provide more science, better data, hopefully also better information, to enable the scientific community on the one hand, but also public institutions, emergency services, to better deal with the major events which affect our societies, our citizens, and where solid earth science has a lot of work to provide to help us better deal with them, better anticipate them, but also better deal with the consequences. I must say from that point of view, I would also like to note that I'm particularly happy in the work of EPOS, that you are bringing together so much data in a fair data way. I think that is particularly important also for European policies. And in that regard, also the work which is already ongoing in the context of the European Open Science Cloud, I think makes EPOS a particularly important European research infrastructure. Now, I took up my responsibilities only a few months ago, so I'm discovering European research policy still. But what has already struck me over the last 6 months is that infrastructure, European infrastructure policy, what you are doing in EPOS and many of you in many other areas as well, is really one of the areas of European research where member states are coming most together. We are creating incredible infrastructures in Europe. This is, of course, a very long European tradition. This is not only EU framework policies, but if you look at the European research area and the work of the European ESFRI group for European infrastructure, this is really the area where I see member states most willing and desiring to work very closely together and then using European instruments to ensure that. I think there are very good reasons for that. Infrastructure is something which is often extremely costly, and pooling national resources in such European infrastructure, I think, makes a lot of sense in terms of critical mass, but also in the case of EPOS, as in others, also in bringing scientific disciplines together across EU member states. So I very much wish that we can use the best practices developed in the infrastructure community to also impact more the rest of the European research area, and to help us, member states and EU institutions, to continue to converge and bring the research capacities in Europe more joined up, to ensure that the critical mass of European research is even more visible and more impactful, and we will certainly also use the very good practices of EPOS. So for all these reasons, Massimo, Salvatore, Minister, colleagues, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to then handing over the plate, which is why I'm here. But that will come during the official ceremony a little later. Merci beaucoup.
Jean-Éric, thank you. And I would like to take this opportunity also to thank the European Commission. Of course, we have a high-level representative here. But there are people like Jean-David Malot of the Directorate, who is dealing, let's say, with research infrastructures, and actually with whom I have the pleasure to work in Brussels for a couple of years. And then the people of the unit that is taking care of these policies. And I have to thank them very much, because the help of the European Commission of these people was, let's say, threefold. Was formal, of course, was financial, because of this implementation project with, I think it's a kind of 16 or 17 million euro, I don't know exactly the number. And then was also informal, because setting up an ERIC requires a dialogue among member states and associated countries, or eventually also third countries, but also with the European Commission. So the European Commission was always ready, let's say, to listen, to advise us, let's say, besides the formal approach and the formal procedures. So thank you very much. And then I give the floor to Massimo Cocco, the EPOS coordinator. Most of you knows him, let's say, but let me say that he was a driving force to get us here for this ceremony. And actually, the representatives of the member states and associated countries that were with me at the BGR, at the Board of Governmental Representatives, knows that sometimes it was really challenging to stop him when he was trying to provide to us all the necessary details for the setting up of this ERIC. Please, Massimo.
So thank you very much, everyone, and it is a pleasure for me to stay here representing so many people. So I have the responsibility to present EPOS here on behalf of a huge community. Many of the persons that have built EPOS are here. Others are not here presently, are even still working to build EPOS. So I will try now to show and to explain what EPOS is doing and the challenging. And we start with a video, a short video that will introduce the EPOS infrastructure.
Earth is a geologically active planet. Its internal structure constantly brings about morphological changes to its surface. Tectonic plate movements constitute the most evident manifestation of this dynamism. As with all areas of our planet, the European tectonic plate is acted upon by naturally occurring phenomena, determining the vulnerability of the anthropic environment. Europe hosts a high population density and likewise a dense production network. Understanding how the Earth works as a system is critically important to modern society that needs resources to support daily life and security in the face of natural hazards. Earth sciences can provide the answers to maintain the Earth as a habitable, safe, and prosperous planet. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, tsunamis are manifestations of Earth's natural dynamics. What makes them catastrophic is how they impact human society. Indeed, only anthropic environments can be impacted by, so to speak, natural disasters. Earth sciences collect data and observations thanks to which we can understand these phenomena and assess the threats they may pose to society. Observing systems used to monitor geological phenomena on the Earth's surface or from space provide data for scientific research. Through research, we understand, forecast, and mitigate the hazards posed by Earth's dynamism. The research infrastructures for Earth sciences include monitoring networks, experimental laboratories, and data centers, collecting an enormous quantity of heterogeneous multidisciplinary data, and supercomputers generating novel scientific products. By their very nature, disasters cross national boundaries, and the data they generate do not regard just one field of research. Therefore, the task of understanding complex geological phenomena requires collection and integration of multidisciplinary data, gathered by means of complex technologies and dedicated services. EPOS was founded as a response to this. EPOS is the pan-European infrastructure for sharing solid Earth science data, observations, and research results. With its innovative IT platform, EPOS enables sharing and integration of data collected by the research infrastructures of 25 Euro-Mediterranean area countries. EPOS architecture is designed for sustainability, providing services to scientists, national authorities, and society at large. EPOS enables interdisciplinary and transnational use of data, thus broadening out the horizons of research and technological progress, while fostering widespread awareness of issues relating to sustainable, responsible use of environments. Each scientific community shall ensure the expertise and resources required not only for collecting and analyzing data, but also for maintaining territorial observation systems. EPOS thematic core services are responsible for integrating all data, metadata, and services arriving from various national and international infrastructures. EPOS integrated core services provide a new interface for users. By adopting data access policies aligned to open science principles, these services provide data and products in a usable form. Unraveling physical and chemical processes responsible for phenomena impacting planet Earth and society requires harmonized and freely accessible data and services that allow innovative, multidisciplinary, and cross-disciplinary research. Providing this is the mission of research infrastructures like EPOS. Building the future on a solid scientific base.
So, thanks. The video was done to present EPOS not to society, but to the national governments and the authorities. It has been done internally. Now what I would like to do is to introduce EPOS and the change, so the beginning of the end, or the end of the beginning. It depends on the direction in which we analyze the process. So today, actually, the October 30, the European Commission has granted the EPOS ERIC, and it is a key result achieved through a construction of this research infrastructure that lasted at least 10 years. There are so many people that work, that are still working as a community in this, and I feel also the responsibility of presenting them, not only the scientists involved in EPOS since the beginning, but also the national authorities, because we engaged the national authorities since the beginning, and their continuous support. Many of them are present here in this room, and their support, their criticism, their suggestions was essential in order to start EPOS. Establishing EPOS ERIC is one of the two key objectives of the EPOS implementation phase. Establishing the ERIC, and the other is the implementation of the data and service provision, which is the task of the EPOS implementation phase project that will finish next year, September 2019, and has been funded by the European Commission. So at the beginning, I would like to show you how we arrived to this moment, so to understand which have been the milestones and the cornerstones of this long-lasting process. The conception phase of EPOS was identified since the beginning as the need to build a long-term plan of integration plan. So EPOS has never been presented as a research project. So the idea since the beginning was to integrate, and we relied on so many different projects at European national level that allowed the communities to build up, to be aware of of the importance of sharing the data, of sharing the services, and to enable science. So this is the idea of EPOS, integrating existing and future advanced European facilities and research infrastructure, and the idea to build a single research infrastructure. So the conception phase gave us several lessons that we can realize today when you arrive at establishing the network. The first one, that the strategic choice of having a single research infrastructure for solid earth science has been shared among all the solid earth scientists. This is not by chance. It has been a decision. And at the beginning, the decision was not shared by all the community. I have to admit that when I participated to the first meetings to create EPOS, I went there representing seismology and volcanology. And there were other people from the geological surveys, from the tectonics, for the geophysics, that there was intense discussion deciding to have a single research infrastructure for solid earth. And this is unique in the environmental setting. In the other disciplines, in the marine science, in the atmospheric science, in the biodiversity ecosystems, there are many research infrastructures. And we were aware of the complexity of undertaking this path. The second key lesson concerns the impact of the European projects. So for years, the European Commission has funded the European research projects, also producing data and services. we can tell that the impact of this process really depends on the awareness of the concept of research infrastructure of the community. And indeed, among all the different research communities today, currently involved in EPOS, we can tell that that's been different. And EPOS had to put in face all these different maturity in order to share the goal. The third lesson was the perspective. So build this long-term integration plan has been shared with the entire scientific community. So when we moved from the conception to the preparatory phase, the EPOS mission was clear. And the EPOS vision is clear and is still valid today. Creating a pan-European research infrastructure for solid science. The foster innovation in a multidisciplinary research framework, because a solid earth science per se, it is multidisciplinary because it involves so many different disciplines and different communities, and the data that we share are different not only in terms of the data formats, but in terms of the communities that produce this data. The culture of data sharing is different and make possible a better understanding of the Earth, surface, subsurface dynamics, not only earthquakes, but also how the Earth works. And in this picture that was motivating the vision, you can see how much the scientific can produce impact on the risk, geohazard and risk mitigation, and on georesources, as exploitation. Here you can also see in a different way how science, risk communication, and the private sector and industry. So it was a challenge since the beginning, and that we started in the preparatory phase. So the mission of EPOS was also very clear, and this has an impact for the ERIC. The mission is to create a single sustainable distributed research infrastructure that integrates the diverse research infrastructure for solid earth science. Single, as already mentioned, sustainable is our current challenge. Distributed, it is the pan-European dimension of EPOS. This mission is still valid today, and has been shared with the community nearly 10 years ago, in 2008. So the key lessons for the preparatory phase were important, and I want to share with you because it is important that we understand how we arrived to this important achievement. Engaging the data providers, the IT experts, and the government representatives since the beginning has been proved being a successful choice. The governments, the national authorities, have been called to be the decision body of EPOS since the preparatory phase. It is now more than 8 years that we work together. And yesterday, we had the last meeting of the board of government representatives, because now we have the General Assembly of the ERIC, where 22 countries in Europe nominated the representative of the ministry. Many of them are present here in this room, because tomorrow we will have the first General Assembly of the ERIC. The ERIC has never been an alternative. We worked since the beginning to build an ERIC. Every twinder was very clear, and the alternatives were not so appealing and viable for us. The EPOS governance model was also decided to build an EPOS delivery framework. And this has been decided and shared with the communities, both and the national authorities. The financial model has been designed and planned to make it ready for implementation phase. And I will come back in a while on this point of the financial model. And finally, the functional architecture, which has been designed during the preparatory phase. In the video, you have seen in a much more animated way which is the architecture. But this is shared since the beginning of the preparatory phase with a different graphic, but the contents were present since the EPOS preparatory phase project. And it is important that we understand which is the role of the countries. As the Vice Minister, the Italian Vice Minister, Dr. Lorenzo Fioramonti, has just pointed out, there are a lot of data generated by national networks. So the national research infrastructure, the observing systems, distributed in 28 countries. In the video, just by chance, we make the example of an earthquake at the border between Italy, France, and Switzerland. I'm sure that our French colleagues, this is just an example. But this is an earthquake there, it is 3 different seismic zonations, seismic hazard maps in each of the countries. Therefore, harmonization is important because natural disaster, but natural phenomena, do not recognize the border. And this is an important signal also for Europe today in the current situation. So what EPOS wanted to do since the beginning is very simple in principle, but very complex in practice. We started to convince each community to work in their own thematic core services. So each community is responsible to integrate the data, seismologists, geologists, GNSS, satellite data, volcanology, and so on, geomagnetic observation, induced seismicity, anthropogenic hazard. And the only requirements that we ask to these communities is to integrate the data, making their data accessible, shareable, interoperable. And the innovation of EPOS is to build the new infrastructure, the integrated core services, where a user can have access to all this data, and they can foster, enable multidisciplinary use of data and services. It is important that we recognize that this is not preventing access at the thematic core services, because there are international organizations like Orpheus for seismology, the Euro-Mediterranean Seismological Center, Intermagnet for geomagnetic data, EUREF for GNSS data, and also the European Space Agency that is involved, engaged as an associate partner in EPOS since the beginning. They will continue to provide access, but even access at the national research infrastructures. So we want to build the new infrastructure grounded on the existing research infrastructure, integrating and relying on what already exists. So when we enter in the implementation phase, there was a big step for EPOS, because we moved from a preparatory phase project with a huge project of 25 countries engaged in integrating the data, 5 international organizations, and so many data and communities. So the challenge of the implementation phase was to integrate and to build the data and service provision. At the same time, we decided to create the ERIC and the Consortium. So EPOS ERIC has been decided to be hosted in Italy since at the end of the preparatory phase in 2014. And during the implementation phase, we decided to host the central hub of the integrated core services in UK, France, and Denmark, with technical support by Denmark. So there are 4 countries that are hosting and are contributing through an host premium the ERIC components, and which is another peculiarity of EPOS. It is a sort of distributed ERIC, which is particular. So what we are doing in the implementation phase, we are implementing the services in the thematic services, standardizing and harmonizing the data. I will not enter in the detail, but I want only to point out one thing. Making data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, is essential. We all agree on the document, but EPOS can provide a direct experience on the amount of work that is required. The huge quantity of work on people that have to work on metadata, standardizing metadata, convince the community to use the same metadata standards. In EPOS, after 5 years of work on this, we have more than 12 metadata standards that now are interoperable. And this is a huge amount of work that has been undertaken and should be recognized. The novel part of EPOS is to build these integrated core services, which is new infrastructure. It is not only a portal. It is much more, because through this portal, you have access to the metadata to build interoperability. And for this reason, we are collaborating, we are discussing with the EOSC, European Open Science Cloud, because we are keen to contribute to the European Open Science Cloud, but at the same time, we want that these new initiatives build on the top of what we have done. And we have to be aware that building the communities to this level of integration requires so much efforts that we need to build on top of that and avoiding interference or maybe perspectives that could be not grounded or not feasible in the short or mid-term. So the integrated core services means to build the e-infrastructures that will have all of the access to the data. And in EPOS, this part, which is what we call the distributed core services, is exactly the interface with the European Open Science Cloud or with many other services. But even on this, we have to be very clear. The market is offering a lot, and the free market is offering also viable, feasible solution for us. Amazon can provide the processing resources extremely cheap. And if Europe wants to be competitive for science, we need to adopt solutions that are sustainable for the research infrastructure, not only in financial terms, but also in terms of the easy access to computational resources for science innovation. And the integration was also our target audience that we have invited. So which are the key lessons for the implementation phase? The IT solution for interoperability, which seems to be working. The ERIC component hosted in 4 countries. The TCS community building. And this is an important message for the ERIC. EPOS ERIC must try to implement the services on behalf of the community. We don't need a further legal body. We need a legal body that has to make ICSC and the infrastructure operational. Nothing less, and there is a lot to do, nothing more. And this is a message important in the way in which EPOS ERIC will work. The ICS architecture is novel and original. And finally, I want to come back to the financial issues. The harmonization of pan-European integration with national strategies and priority, which has proven to be successful. But what we are addressing today is financial viability. So the long-term sustainability is something that is still, I believe, for any research infrastructure, but for sure I can speak for EPOS, is not possible to be addressed in the short term. And this depends on many different ways. So the efforts that we spent since the beginning to harmonize the national funding with the EPOS ERIC, I believe it is an important lesson that we can bring home. Now, today, EPOS starts, which means that we are finishing a phase. We are finishing the phase of the vision. We are finishing the phase of declaring the mission. And now we have to enter in a pre-operational testing and operational phase. EPOS ERIC must demonstrate to be able to manage this, and we need to keep the communities involved. So the new framework relies on the operational performances of the EPOS delivery framework, the financial viability and the long-term sustainability, as well as the governance shared with all the communities. So the partnership of EPOS ERIC is presently 10 countries already signed the ERIC. We hope today to have the 11th, if we receive a letter from Poland, if I can say. But of course, we will work in order to increase the partnership, also to increase the budget of the ERIC, of course, but also to try to promote national funding. The key message to conclude of EPOS is the following. We spent 10 years to integrate the communities. And here you see the different communities with the list of services and access to data that they are already providing. In EPOS, there are international organizations like Orpheus for Seismology that represents even many more countries than EPOS. We want to strengthen the role of this organization, integrating in EPOS for the data provision, but to strengthen them. And what we want to create with the hub, the central lab and the ICS, is just a new platform for discovery. Just an example, I use volcanology to show you what does it mean multidisciplinary. Studying a volcano, which is a single event, a single natural phenomenon, volcanic eruption, involve so many disciplines, so many scientists with a different tradition, from physics making plume scenarios, to experimental petrology, mineralogy, tectonics, geoenergy, petrology, so many experiences that providing access to this data is a challenge, and this is exactly what EPOS want to undertake. And to conclude, I was also to mention the perspective for the global perspective. EPOS has been proposed, I believe, by Italy, but supported by other countries, as one of the research infrastructure of a global perspective is in the Global Science Forum and of OECD. And I believe that earth science is ready to play this role, and Europe should take the lead of this global perspective. We have already engaged contacts with IRIS and with the United States, similar other initiatives in Australia and Japan, and I think that EPOS ERIC can try to represent the community and Europe and Italy for the representing. So, in conclusion, I want also to show you, with the last slide, to mention at national level. To build the ERIC and EPOS, we have harmonized these priorities and strategies, which do not only means engaging the national authorities, but also means to engage the national organizations. EPOS in Italy, I use Italy since we are in Rome. I hope that all our foreigners will allow me to use this. In Italy, there is a joint research unit which is participating to EPOS, and we still need to work to adapt the mechanisms to allow all the research organizations to participate in EPOS with an equitable and the same opportunities. We still didn't reach this level, but it is a long-lasting process. The joint research unit involves 4 research organizations, INGV, CNR, OGS Trieste, and ISPRA. It involves 2 foundations, Eucentre and Cinega, which is the IT, initiatives, and several universities that have been mentioned, University of Rome 3, University of Trieste, Genova, and Napoli Federico II. So I believe that that is another important. Representing national research organization is another challenge for the ERIC. And sometimes we do not recognize that there is this granularity behind, and building an infrastructure like EPOS must build in this, has to demonstrate the capability to undertake this. So to conclude, EPOS want to integrate this national and transnational research infrastructure for solid and safe to provide access to data and services. I believe that enabling science is already a great scientific added value. Second, we want to guarantee open access to multidisciplinary research infrastructure, which is fairness, in order to foster cross-disciplinary and transnational research. Providing transnational access to distributed research infrastructure, believe me, is a challenge. It is really difficult. It's difficult for any research infrastructure, from a synchrotron to a laboratory. But sending researchers from Europe on a volcano is a little bit tricky in terms of managing, convincing the hosting institution to have the security, the liability, to allow a researcher from Portugal to go to Iceland or to Etna. So creating a novel e-infrastructures, and the fact that we integrated since the beginning the IT experts in EPOS allow EPOS to benefit of e-science innovation. And finally, foster scientific, technological, and ICT innovation for the grand challenges, and improve the geohazards, risk mitigation, and sustainable management of georesources. EPOS has to be honest. EPOS will not be responsible of managing any alert, any emergency plan for society. This is a responsibility of the participating organization through their agreement and commitments that they have with the national, regional, and local civil protection. But EPOS want to integrate the data to provide products associated with the hazard and with the risk. And one example, explaining society how an earthquake early warning works. Why in Japan they use it and not in Italy is important. This does not imply different of the scientific progress. It is the way in which the earthquakes and the natural phenomena appear and the time that we have that does not allow in Italy to use an earthquake early warning. But also the resilience of the society is another fact. So there is an indirect and direct way in which sharing data can foster and contribute to the hazard and the risk. So we are now arrived to a cornerstone for our integration plan, and we are aware that what we have now in front of us is even larger than before. There is for sure a higher responsibility with the community, but also an incredible, unique opportunity to put in practice what we have built so far in 10 years. And I'm sure that the EPOS community is able to undertake this and to successfully deliver this challenge in the next years, I hope for the long term. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Massimo. Well, of course, I mean, you have to imagine that I was not impressed by all this information that Massimo provided as today, because I had almost 5 years to digest, let's say, the structure and the aim and the scope of EPOS. I am very much optimistic that Poland can be set tomorrow in the General Assembly, and eventually, if all will go all right, the first General Assembly will have in the agenda a point for the acceptance of Poland as a member of the ERIC. So from the presentation Massimo gave, you can understand how strong was the flow of information and this bottom-up approach coming to ministerial representatives from the international scientific community. And on the other side, we had the national strategies, budget constraints. So we had to put this into one pot, shake it, and what we got was, let's say, the status and the documents that allowed us to have this ceremony today for the launch of the ERIC. In the center of all of this, there is the representing entity. So actually, the representing entity that is in the center of this approach, top-down and bottom-up, is also at the center of the, in case of Italy, of the joint research unit we have in Italy, is actually the entity that is managing the financial contribution that this ministry is making available, and actually is transforming some of these monies in capacities, human resources and infrastructures and so on. So it's my pleasure to give the floor now to Professor Carlo Doglioni, that is the president of INGV, that is the representing entity this ministry nominated for EPOS ERIC. Please, Carlo.
Thank you, Salvatore. Good morning, everybody. And INGV is the hosting EPOS ERIC, and just a brief highlight about the organization of our institution, which is subdivided into 3 departments: environment, earthquakes, and volcanology and volcanics. We have 3 observatories, 6 sections, 2 infrastructure, research infrastructure. One is EPOS and the other is EMSO. And we are more or less 100,000 people. We have 27 sites and workplaces all around the country. We collaborate with a number of nations worldwide, and we do basic research, but we do a strong, relevant service to civil protection. For about 30% of our activity is devoted to provide data to monitoring system to the Italian civil protection. So we have a clear societal address. So as was already mentioned by the Vice Minister and my colleagues, Italy, Greece are the most affected nations by seismicity, and but there is seismicity all over Europe, and in Italy we expect to have earthquakes of magnitude even above 7, but in the Mediterranean we may reach even magnitude higher than 8. So in order to monitor this seismicity, we have a fundamental seismic network and GPS network and several other nets which are spread out all over the country. All the data are available to all other agencies worldwide. And we have 3 monitoring rooms in Rome, Naples, and Catania, where we detect earthquakes in real time, 24 hours a day. As was already mentioned, we have also 10 volcanoes which we may consider active in Italy. You all know about LHC, Large Hadron Collider, which the Higgs boson was detected, but you can imagine LHC event which is at the scale of 10 to minus 19 with respect to the size of the Earth. So there are 26 order of magnitude of differences. So in order to study subatomic particle, we may have an infrastructure like CERN, which is based in a single area. But in order to study the Earth, we need a much wider distribution of a monitoring system, as Massimo was already pointing out. So this contribution from all the countries, all different expertises and different types of monitoring system, we multiply our capability to do good science. So EPOS is the basis for doing science. As you know, EPOS means European Plate Observing System. For those who are not geologists or do not know about this, what means a plate, the lithosphere is the external shell of the Earth, which is about 100 kilometers thick. The underlying material is the mantle, and a plate is a fragment of the lithosphere. So we can see from seismology that the lithosphere is this upper part of about 100 kilometers above this area where seismic waves slow down. So Europe, as Massimo already said, from the geological point of view, has no boundaries. And EPOS is providing the possibility to share all the data. So we collect data, which are the stones, the bricks, to make science, to make a nice building. So a bunch of data doesn't make a nice building, but we cannot make a nice building without data. So EPOS is the bunch of data, and science is the combination with a good architect, with a project to make a nice building, a nice result from the scientific point of view. So all the topics which are the aims of EPOS are clearly have a number of applications, natural hazards, in environment, and clearly in resources, as for example in geothermy. And science is usually made with the classical 3 steps, geometry, kinematics, and dynamics. So first of all, we have to know all the information about the construction of the Earth, how it's made, like we try to understand the anatomy. So we have, for example, a number of possibilities to recognize the shape of the lithosphere, the plate, with seismic reflection profiles, or with seismic waves. We can recognize the velocity and infer the geometry of the interior of the Earth with lateral anisotropies, which corresponds to lateral variation in geochemistry and temperature of the interior of the Earth, in order to arrive to have a view of how it's made, because we come from mantle. We are made from atoms coming from the interior of the Earth. So moving from the geometry to kinematics, we have established a very important network, for example, for GPS data in order to understand the kinematics and the tectonics of the Mediterranean and Europe as well. So anything in nature, in the world, is controlled by gradients in pressure, temperature, electrochemical gradients, but also societal, social, economic gradients. They determine energy. Everything on Earth, what is moving the Earth, is determined by gradients. For example, a hot lower layer with an upper cold layer. But we need to know better the interior of the Earth, because we know very little about the distribution of geochemistry of the interior, for example, of iron, and the interior of temperature. So blades over the Earth are moving at different velocities along this flow that you see here, and the different velocities are constrained by gradients in composition, gradients in viscosity, which determine gradients in velocity, which determine pressure gradients. So an earthquake is just the distribution of energy accumulated by pressure gradients, like the earthquakes that have affected Italy since 2016. Well, for example, you see here that's the center of Amatrice after the first shock, August 24th, 2016. And another very interesting thing is that, for example, we can recognize that from GPS data that usually earthquakes occur where there is a gradient in GPS data. So we often forget that 100 years there was the First World War, and the possibility, why there is a war? Because there is a gradient in terms of cultural and economic views from different countries. And science is a bridge to decrease these gradients. And EPOS is starting now its very important journey to convey both science all across the continent and the effective message that science may contribute to foster the European Union that allowed us to live for 70 years without war in our constructing states federation. Well, I think we have to thank Massimo, Coco, and Lily Freda, because they were really an engine. I want to thank, of course, all the joint research units, all of the different countries, all the representatives of Europe, but without the tenacity, enthusiasm, and the generosity of these two people, two persons, to which I think we have to express our greatest gratitude, EPOS will not reach this starting point after 16 years of preparation. Thank you.
Carlo, thank you very much, and thanks for being here representing the representing entity that highlight again for us, for the Ministry of Education, University and Research, is a very important part of, let's say, this toy. And then I will give you the floor. I will give the floor to the last speaker. And in this case, what I can say is that, of course, all of us, member states, are making an effort to try to participate to an ERIC. Is an effort during negotiations of, let's say, legal and financial parameters. Is a political and financial effort. But there are some countries where this effort, from the political point of view in particular, the administrative point of view, can be a bit, let's say, stronger. So I will give the floor to, as I said, to Dr. Valdimarsdottir from the Iceland Met Office of the Icelandic Ministry for the Environment and Natural Resources. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Salvatore. So honored to be here today to celebrate this great accomplishment of establishing an ERIC in European Solid Art Science. Special congratulations to Lily, Massimo, and the PDB management team. I am, as Salvatore says, here as a representative, one of the prospective members of EPOS. I'm going to share a little insight into how Iceland and the Icelandic Met Office, IMO, benefits from participation and what lies ahead for us in order to become full members. Iceland is located on the plate boundary between Eurasia and North America, where new crust is constantly being formed in volcanic events and large earthquakes are repeatedly generated by crustal faulting. Iceland has over 30 active volcanic systems, and volcanic eruptions occur about once every 2 to 5 years. These eruptions range from being relatively small, posing limited local hazard, to major explosive eruptions resulting in lava and ash outpourings with catastrophic effects on a national and international scale. Who doesn't remember the thousands of flight cancellations caused by Eyjafjallajökull's eruption back in 2010? The Icelandic Met Office leads Iceland's participation in EPOS, and the IMO is responsible for monitoring all national hazards which Iceland is exposed to, including earthquakes, eruptions, floods, avalanches, and extreme weather. Our integrated monitoring systems can therefore be considered globally unique. Our research focus is on all these natural processes mentioned, and in order to strengthen our monitoring capabilities. We have a long-term advisory role with the Icelandic government and the civil protection, which issues public alerts about impending national hazards. IMO is also responsible for monitoring meteorological and ash dispersion hazards in the whole Atlantic airspace, the second largest airspace in the world. Those of you who are familiar with the forces of Icelandic nature and have experienced Icelandic weather firsthand understand that the everyday life of our team of 140 experts can be quite hectic at times. But why EPOS? We believe that there are mutual benefits for Iceland's participation in EPOS. Because of the highly active plate boundary, a great volume of invaluable research data and volcanic and crustal processes is recorded on our monitoring system. And these data will be made available through EPOS ERIC infrastructure. In return, through EPOS and related research programs, we receive support to implement quality data management and develop services to maintain long-term access to the data and products for benefit of European Earth science. EPOS has already had great impact on research calls in both the 7th Framework and Horizon 2020 programs. These calls led to the funding of the now completed volcano supersite project FutureWork and the ongoing networking project EuroWork. FutureWork, which was led by the University of Iceland and